DW Africa Link.
Zimbabwe's government has decided to return foreign-owned commercial farms that were seized during the country's controversial land reform program in 2000. So far, about 67 white farmers are set to receive their lands back, but analysts say the number could go as high as 400. The government says it is not reversing the land reform program started by ex-President Robert Mugabe, but rather it is correcting it.
This is not reversing the land reform program. The land was the prime cause for the first and second Chimurenga and for the fast-track land reform program that we undertook. And now we wanted to follow the law in terms of the constitution to correct that aspect.
That was Zimbabwe's Agriculture Minister Anxious Masuka. This is Africa Link, the podcast that connects you to the stories that matter across Africa. I'm Ajuatin Krama Domina, your host for today.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
Zimbabwe will return dozens of foreign-owned farms seized more than 2 decades ago during a land reform drive, but it's not reversing the contested policy. The land grab was launched by longtime ruler Robert Mugabe in 2000, with thousands of white farmers evicted, often violently, and their land redistributed to black Zimbabweans to address colonial-era injustices. The policy triggered sanctions, deepening the country's economic isolation by limiting its access to the international banking system. Now, the government says the move is a legal and constitutional step under Bilateral Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement, BIPPA, covering farmers from countries like Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Switzerland, and former Yugoslavia. It is also part of efforts to rebuild ties with Western nations and lenders. However, the scope of the policy remains unclear, and reactions across Zimbabwe have been mixed. To unpack this, I'm joined by Walter Chambati. He is Executive Director at the Sam Moyo African Institute of Agrarian Studies. David Drury is attorney at Golub and Blank Legal Practitioners, and DW correspondent Privilege Mushanhiri in Harare. Welcome all of you to the show. So I'm going to ask all three of you the first round of questions, and then we can, zoom in properly into the discussion. Privilege, the first is to you. Talk to us about this whole proposal by the government, or whether it is now a decision. What does it entail? How did they even arrive at this? And, somebody may be asking, are the farms actually going to be handed back to the white farmers? Talk to us about all of that.
Thanks, Ajoa. So what has been happening is that this whole exercise did not start only in 2026. Government way back in 2020, 2021, that's when they made an announcement that they were considering returning farms that were protected under the bilateral investments back to the previous owners. Farms that are protected under the bilateral investments is that you may find that most of the farms were not like farms that were handed down from generation to generation, as in it might have been owned by someone's grandfather, they handed over down. Some of these farms were bought, the farmers bought the farms, and some of them bought more farms and consolidated them into estates. And these were not necessarily Zimbabwean nationals. Some of them were farmers that came from different countries, like European countries, who bought farms. So during the land reform, they lost these farms because the farms were not supposed to be touched because they were under bilateral arrangements.
How many lands are we talking about, and to who are we giving these lands? Are there specifications on the nationalities of the white farmers?
Minister of Agriculture was speaking in Parliament. He talked of 67 farms, but we know that there may be more farms, And I think David could assist when we go into the discussion of some of the farms that are going to be impacted as well, because I understand that there are plus or minus 400 farmers, some of them that remained on the land that are due to get title.
Thank you for that. David, I was actually going to come to you for my next question. From, the legal point of view, what does this decision mean? One, for the white farmers who have lost their lands for a long time, and two, for the people who have held onto these lands up until now.
My understanding is that those persons who have remained somehow or other on properties that were previously registered in their name will be entitled to remain on those properties, whether to the whole extent of the original title deed or with regard to a downsized portion. With regard to the measure of compensation for those portions that have been taken, or where there has been a loss from a compensation or monetary perspective, that remains to be, or the dynamics of that still remains to be settled and set out. And I'm not aware of any legislation which is presently in place which identifies the policy position and the exact terms and conditions as to how that is to be achieved. But the idea is that title for the portion that is occupied, or for the whole of the previous historical portion, will in fact be handed back. As to whether there will be a measure of compensation added to the restitution aspect seems unlikely, but that has yet to be articulated by the current Minister of Agriculture, Lands.
Right. I'm going to come to you on what you and perhaps maybe what your clients expect, barring attorney-client privilege and what you can disclose. But let me bring you in, Walter, at this point. Looking at the historical context about the program that Robert Mugabe instituted, it was not particularly pleasant for the Zimbabwean economy, which has been agrarian for a very long time. If you are analyzing this decision, will it have any bearing on the Zimbabwean economy?
The effects of the fast-track land reform program on the Zimbabwean economy are contested. So there are many myths around whether Zimbabwe was a regional food basket of the Southern Africa region, which is incorrect. In fact, for a long time, South Africa has been the food basket of the region. Zimbabwe, at most, managed to produce just adequate food to feed itself. The exports were very limited to only a few years. So we're managing to feed ourselves, not that we were the food basket of the region.
So at no point has Zimbabwe been, very self-reliant to the extent that it is even exporting food to its neighboring countries. Is that what you're saying?
No, we were food self-sufficient, but we barely exported food to other countries in the region. That's the correct position. We were net exporter for a very few years, between 1980 until around about 2000, when land reform sets in.
Okay, so the country was still a net exporter to some extent between the years that you have mentioned.
Only for a few years.
Let me go to the substantive question about how this decision comes to you. How does this decision, to return these lands to former owners, how does it come to you?
Yeah, so the issue about farms protected under BIPPA has been a sticking point during the whole land reform program on legitimate BIPPA farms where people had been settled. It's probably close to 2 decades or so when people have established their lives on the land, involved in a whole range of productive activities. So for them to be removed for the return of the farms as per the recently introduced statutory instrument, which privilege was mentioning, which was introduced in 2020, statutory in 2020, which the government said they are planning to either return the farms or pay compensation. So there was supposed to be an institutional setup, a committee to decide the feasibility of whether the farms could be returned to their former legitimate BIPPA owners or compensation was supposed to be paid. So it's a complex matter. So you have to consider and balance the interests of the BIPPA owners as well as those who have been on the farms for over 20 years. So far, we have not heard whether the compensation is also going to be paid for people who have invested their lives over the last 2 decades.
Privilege, you have been speaking with some people. What has been the reaction in general? One, for the people, as Walter said, people who have held onto this land, built their lives around these farms for all these years. And then for the people who are now going to get the lands, what has been the reaction?
So what is happening is that for those that are seeking compensation, it's a welcome development. Speaking to one of the farmers who has been, battling with government to recover part of his land that was taken during the land reform, he says it's a welcome development, but what they are seeking then is that government must not be selective to leave out farmers who took them to court, because he says that they have a feeling that the government is approaching this with a selective approach where whoever took them to court previously, they are not considering them for this exercise. And at the same time, if you go to the black farmers, it's an anxious moment. They tell you that, look, they came to these farms not because they didn't just show up. They got offer letters which were legal for them to settle on that land. And for them now to hear that they have to leave that land to make way for the former owner, for them, they are seeing it is unfair, because they are saying that they did not just come there. And some of them are saying on the land that they were settled, they were given part of the land that did not even have any infrastructure, and they did not disturb any infrastructure that the former owner had on those farms. So they've put in their own infrastructure. They've spent time, put in money during the past 20 years. And then for them to hear that now that they have to make way for the former owner, for them, they are taking it as a very unfair process.
Thank you, Privilege. But David, let me come to you. For many, this whole land reform issue is quite complex, and we have even seen it from this discussion. The framing of the whole reform was in the context of colonization and correcting inequalities, resulting from British colonial rule, for instance. Do you see this as a correction of one injustice to perpetuate another injustice?
So one of the problem areas from a legal perspective is that once an international convention or treaty or agreement was signed, there were basically three requirements. First of all was signature, either by the president or a person specifically nominated by him to enter into and conclude that agreement. Secondly, that the treaty or agreement was ratified by Parliament. And thirdly, that the treaty or agreement was incorporated into our domestic law by an act of Parliament. Now, with regard to all the bilateral protection agreements that have been signed, it is the third aspect in particular that has been left out. And that has never been properly dealt with in terms of settled law domestically. And it's this aspect that has been, I'm guessing, to be addressed properly, so that the parameters of how restitution, if restitution is to take place. And I have to say to you, it's not necessarily a given, because there should be some consideration as to what has taken place from the date of appropriation to now, restitution. So if personalities have been put there on the ground, and privilege is absolutely correct, where there's been investment by new farmers having in place authority with regard to an offer letter, a permit, or a lease, as the case might be, well, then there's got to be compensation in relation to that, and there has to be restitution. But again, I stress that that ought not to be, from a policy perspective, a given. Where that is not possible, then the fallback position would be the duty on government to pay full compensation for the land and the improvements, particularly for the bilateral protection agreement, all of which bilateral protection agreements were dealt with after independence.
If you are able to disclose, and the focus is on if, will your clients be okay with just compensation, or some of them just want their lands back?
Well, there's no clear answer to that, because each client is a different perspective. So certain clients of mine, and I speak for my clients, would be content, if one can use that word advisedly, with receiving full and adequate compensation for the land in question. You have to remember that there have been two, or rather three, International Convention of Settlement of International Dispute matters between the government of Zimbabwe and the bilaterally protected personalities. The first, if I can broadly call it that, was the Dutch farmers case, which was dealt with in Paris, where there was a determination applying international law with regard to 13 Dutch farmers. That matter is largely done and dusted, to the extent that those persons' properties have been compensated, albeit in dribs and drabs. Then there is the German/Austrian/Swiss investor, von Petzel. And the von Petzel matter was dealt with in two cases. Border Timbers was the one case, and there's also von Petzel himself having various properties in Zimbabwe as an investor post-independence, including forest estates, where awards have been made, but full compensation has yet to take place. So in respect of, and I won't mention them, in respect of some of my clients, there has been restitution where government has been in a position to move a settler with an offer letter, permit or lease somewhere else. And restitution, in the full sense of that word, has been able to take place. Accommodation in that regard at domestic level has taken place, and the parties, so far as I am aware, have been satisfied in relation to that. But it's a tricky issue. But generally speaking, the bottom line is that where a bilateral protection agreement is in place and restitution cannot take place for a variety of reasons, then in that event, full compensation in a currency of choice should be made and must be made.
Right. Thank you, David. Walter, there is the issue about what Zimbabwe currently stands to gain in concrete terms, in returning these lands to these farmers. Does it mean that, from now the country will unlock credits? Like Privilege was talking about the fact that the country has been locked out of international credits for a while now. What does it mean in concrete terms?
No, thank you for that question, Adewa. So, as Privilege mentioned a little while ago, one of the major policy positions of the current government has been around engagement and re-engagement, trying to attract diverse foreign direct investment from a variety of fronts. But it's not necessarily that if we resolve just this BIPPA issue, there's going to be a huge inflow of FDI. As you know, it depends on a whole range of other issues, the risk perception amongst the lenders and so forth. Yeah. So from the government perspective, I would see it as being couched as one of those actions which are geared towards attracting the investment. But from the side of the landholders who've been on the land, it's a dent on their livelihoods. Since they've been there for over 2 decades, they've established a life around those settlements which they were given legitimately by the state. And so far, we have not heard about whether the compensation for those who've been on the land for the last 2 decades is going to be addressed.
This is my last question, and I'm going to ask for all of you to take a bite at it, 1 minute for each person. Walter, since you have the mic already, you can start. What for you would be a fair and sustainable long-term land policy for Zimbabwe?
So the most important thing for me is how we secure the rights of the people who've been given land so that they advance with their livelihoods. How do we accommodate other groups which are still in need of land, women, farm workers, and so forth, so that the country progresses and we can try to grow our agricultural production, among other, a whole range of land-based productive systems. But the most important thing is security. How do we secure the tenure of the people on the land, and how do we support for them to boost their productive capacity so that they are able to feed their families, take children to school, and engage in a whole range of other things that they need for their life.
Right. David, you are next. How does Zimbabwe resolve this issue once and for all?
I think the starting point currently is that we need in place a document or an act of parliament which sets out the specific terms and conditions to enable alignment with international customary law conventions, but also further taking into account the march of history, if you like, from the date of settlement of personalities who've invested capital, labor, and the like onto those farms, which are now to be restituted if that is to take place. And those details need to be spelt out so that there is certainty. Certainty for personalities living in Zimbabwe, and also derive certainty from an international perspective with regard to people being confident that their rights to security of tenure and title will be protected.
Thank you. Privilege, what are the expectations of Zimbabweans as far as resolving this issue once and for all are concerned?
I think much of it is policy consistency. If government sticks to one decision, and it should be, there must be, most people have cited the issue of the inconsistencies in terms of policy and communication from government when it comes to important decisions like this.
Very well. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time. You just had Privilege Mushanhiri, DW correspondent in Harare, Zimbabwe. Earlier, you heard Walter Chambati, he's Executive Director for Samoyo African Institute of Agrarian Studies. And we're also glad to be joined by David Drury. He is an attorney at Gallup and Blank Legal Practitioners. Gentlemen, grateful for your time. As expected, farmers have been reacting differently to the government decision.
This land question has been there for over a century. So I feel like they are disenfranchising these people again for the second time. And it's like the government is lying to the people that the land truly belongs to them.
The situation is complex and expectations vary on how the Zimbabwean government can fairly restore the lands to foreign farmers and still be able to protect its citizens who could lose their livelihoods. We'll continue to follow developments, but for now, share your thoughts on Facebook and TikTok at DW Africa. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the DW Africa YouTube channel. This episode was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabe. And I am Ajua Tinkrama Domina. Bye for now.
DW. Made for minds.